Thank you for your patience. Commissioner Helfrey.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Ward,
Here.
Commissioner Cohn, Commissioner Broyles,
Here.
Commissioner Beatty, Commissioner Depler,
Here.
Commissioner Jackson, Chair Lee,
Present.
Councilmember Brost,
Here.
Mayor Boland.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Tonight's agenda, we have 10 public hearing items, 2 letters of recommendation, and 1 other item. Moving on to the approval of the minutes of Monday, May 3rd, 2021. I have a motion to approve the minutes.
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Okay, Commissioner Ward, move, second by Councilman Brost. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain, please.
Okay, Mayor Boland abstains. Mr. Newberry, do you have all that? Minutes are approved.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Moving on to the department's opening remarks. Mr. Vunich, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, just as a reminder, we do have a number of people in attendance tonight at City Hall. So if the commission members would remember to unmute themselves when they would like to comment, ask a question, or make a statement. And then when you're done, please mute yourself so that we don't get a lot of feedback. We certainly would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the public comment session. Mr. Newberry, do we have anybody who would like to speak on general topics?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we do have one in attendance here at City Hall, Mr. Dwayne Marquint, who wants to speak on general public comment items. With your permission, Mr. Chair, I'll also take the opportunity to give the instruction to those in attendance via Zoom if they would like to speak during the general public comments, not the public hearing items. This would be the time to do so. And with that, excuse me.
Yeah, go
If
ahead,
they'd like-
Mr. Newberry.
if they'd like- Thank you. And if those in attendance on Zoom would like to speak, they should use the raise hand feature or the chat feature.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may, does this relate to something unrelated completely to
Yes.
the SCODE? Okay. Just
Yes.
want to be sure. All right. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Dwayne Marquint.
I'll turn the microphone over to Mr. Markowitz.
And then the person in the middle had a question. I didn't know what the question was.
Right. Hello there. My name is Dwayne Marquardt, and I want to make a public comment about the work that the city has done in the planning and zoning has done on the special circumstance overlay district. They've done a lot of work, and it's been outlined here in resolution 202101. I think you're all familiar with that. No acknowledgements. And so the stated purpose, as you know, the SCOD is to protect the public health and the environment. Can you hear me okay? Everybody? Thank you. Is that the public protect the health and the environment. To have work approved, you must follow a very arduous application process and it take months for approval. And that's what I kind of want to discuss so the public understands that a little bit more. For approval of any and all development improvements or disturbances to occur on a property, there must be an application submitted to the city. The application process discussed below. If the application is accepted, that application is to be reviewed by 28 people in 3 of City of Wildwood departments, and then possibly be reviewed by other city, county, and state and federal agencies. And then only after the application can get approval by all those individuals, then it must be sent to the city council. The city council then can deny or approve. Their only method of approval is to create and pass a new city law or new city ordinance. Approval of the ordinance must include public hearings and a minimum vote of 2/3 majority to pass. And so what's interesting is I did the cost analysis of that a little bit, and every project in site development improvement disturbance requires an application fee of $2,500 plus $250 per acre. And every project includes with the application of phase 1 environmental assessment, and that's approximately $4,000. And then you can use that for maybe 180 days. And if it's greater than 1 year old, you got to start over again. So essentially, any and every activity greater than 100 days apart needs either an updated new phase 1 assessment. And I did some examples just for fun. All right. You guys look real serious. Here's a rough estimate of some things. Let's look at scenario 1. So for anytime that anyone wants to excavate, disturb, mutilate, or dig any place in the city, they need a permit. So if somebody wants to put in a footing with a decorative mason post for their mailbox and they live on a 10-acre lot. Have you guys worked through the math of that? Any guesses? It's $2,500 to apply, 10 times 250 because they have 10 acres, so that's $5,000. And then before they dig the hole, they got to spend $4,000 on an assessment, and that comes to be $9,000. And then if that gets approved, then what happens? Don't everybody yell out at once. It goes to what? It has to go to the city council to get a new law passed for 2/3, and then we have to have a public hearing. And if that's the case, then they get to put in a mailbox. Or what if a tree gets struck by lightning on a 3-acre lot? $2,500, 3 times 250, that's $3,250, $4,000 for an environmental assessment, $7,250. We got to go to the city council. You're getting the guy there in the middle, you're getting bored. $7,250, and then we got to get a new law passed, 2/3 of the council. Then we have to have a public hearing to cut the tree down that lightning struck. And I just got one more scenario. What about when the guy runs through your fence post on the slick ice with a guy with the mailbox? Depends upon when they run over the post. So it's another $4,000 and 2/3 of majority and another $2,500 and another $2,500. And so it's going to cost another $9,000 to get permission to put up your fence post. And that's not even the cost of the fence. So I'm not against any of those things. I think that's all fantastic. And I think that you guys have done a lot of work to look at this, but it just points to the fact that how serious this is. And so we have to make sure that we understand how serious this legislation is. It has good intent and may be needed in specific situations, but I'm imploring that every committee member and each member of the city council must be careful that they receive documented and undeniable reasons to include a property into that SCOD. And, property improvement, if it's not done right, will be completely stifled based on the extreme burden of the application process, the amount of time and the extreme burden of that. And so I just ask that, people have a good understanding of what this is. And I don't want them to have a misunderstanding of how bad things are, but just how serious they are and how well we have to understand that. And then communication has to be, taken care of in the right way also. And so I'm standing here looking at the resolution, and the resolution has also said that Resolution 2021 was passed by unanimous vote and published by the City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, where these properties represent current public health and safety risks relative to any future use. And so each member, I'm being respectful here, but it says that your vote indicates that you have personally identified those problems present a risk problem that impact human health, safety, and threats for the future. And so I know that there's been requests from you and that requested the written documentation that contains the justifications in that resolution that you made those statements of why you clearly state that the properties
Sir,
represent
your
current
5
public
minutes
health and
is up.
safety risks.
Sir, your 5 minutes is up.
I'm sorry.
Your 5 minutes is up, sir.
All right. So I have just a couple more questions then. What
Sir, your 5 minutes is up.
does that mean?
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, would you like to explain?
Yeah, the limit on discussion is 5 minutes, and I'm sure you can continue this, when we get into this discussion under the other public hearing items. Thank you for your comments. So, Mr. Vunish, I'll go ahead and read the public hearing script.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, in the city of Wildwood, public hearings are truly intended to accept comments and questions concerning the advertised items. Since these requests are being presented at a public hearing, no action is planned on them tonight, and consideration of these items is to be taken no earlier than July 19th of 2021. This approach ensures the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission will hear all opinions before taking any action. The city's Department of Planning will address the comments, questions, and concerns that are raised tonight and include them as part of the formal recommendation to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Anyone in attendance at City Hall wanting to speak should fill out a speaker's card and leave it with Mr. Newberry. Those in attendance via the Zoom webinar platform should use the raise hand feature to indicate you wish to participate at this hearing or indicate in the chat feature that you would like to speak. Team member will add you to the list of speakers, which will then be communicated to me as chair, and I will invite you to speak when it is your turn. The commission will allow all parties adequate time to present their positions, but all speakers are limited to 5 minutes each. For tonight's hearing, the department will read each of the 10 items into the record collectively. Following that being completed, the commission will invite anyone wishing to speak to do so one at a time. When you address the commission, please be sure to identify the property or properties you are wishing to provide comment on. Make sure that you announce your name and address for the record. In addition, information on these items can be found in the city's website at www.cityofwildwood.com. The commission would like to thank you for your cooperation and participation in tonight's hearings. So we'll start off. I think, Mr. Vunic, you're going to read the first item and then Travis will follow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the commission, the first item is PZ 10-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of the Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the amendment and change of zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, parenthetical, Chapter 415-505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, again parenthetical, of the zoning ordinance, and including within such district boundaries certain property generally located on the north side of Strecker Road, east of Inglebrook Drive, consisting of approximately 11.57 acres and with a street address of 149 Strecker Road, St. Louis County, locator number 22U330051, which is currently zoned NU non-urban district, Ward 2.
PZ 11-21, City of Wildwood, Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the amendment and the change of the zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, Chapter 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, of the zoning ordinance, and including within such district boundaries certain property generally located on the north side of Strecker Road, east of Inglebrook Drive, consisting of approximately 1.50 acres and with a street address of 157 Strecker Road, St. Louis County, locator number 22U330022, which is currently zoned NU non-urban residence district, Ward 2.
The third site is PZ 12-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of the Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission could consider the amendment and the change in zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city of Wildwood by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD parenthetical, Chapter 415-505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD parenthetical, of the zoning ordinance, and including within such district boundaries, certain property generally located on the south side of Strecker Road, east of Inglebrook Court, consisting of approximately 3.09 acres and with a street address of 162 Strecker Road, St. Louis County locator number 22U330051, which is currently zoned R1 1 acre resident district, Ward 4.
Fourth identified property is PZ 13-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the amendment and the change of the zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, Chapter 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, of the zoning ordinance, and including within such district boundaries certain property generally located on the north side of Strecker Road, east of Inglebrook Drive, consisting of approximately 5.17 acres and with a street address of 165 Strecker Road, St. Louis County locator number 22U330031, which is currently zoned NU non-urban residence district, Ward 2.
The fifth site is PZ 14-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of the Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the amendment and the change of zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD parenthetical, Chapter 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD of parenthetical of the zoning ordinance, and including within such district boundaries, certain property generally located on the north side of Strecker Road, east of Inglebrook Drive, consisting of approximately 10.16 acres and with a street address of 173 Strecker Road, St. Louis County locator number 22U330062, which is currently zoned NU non-urban resident district, Ward 2.
The sixth site is PZ 15-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the amendment and the change of the zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, Chapter 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, of the zoning ordinance, and including within such district boundaries, certain property generally located on the north side of Strecker Road, east of Inglebrook Drive, consisting of approximately 3 acres and with a street address of 177 Strecker Road, St. Louis County locator number 22U240024, which is currently zoned NU non-urban residence district, Ward 2.
The sixth site, PZ 16-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request for the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the amendment and change of the zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD parenthetical, Chapter 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD parenthetical of the zoning ordinance, including within such district boundaries, certain property generally located on the south side of Strecker Road, east of Inglebrook Court, consisting of approximately 7.51 acres and with a street address of 210 Strecker Road, St. Louis County, locator number 22U330051, which is currently zoned NU non-urban resident district, Ward 4.
The eighth site is PZ 17-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the amendment and the change of the zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, Chapter 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, of the zoning ordinance, and including within such district boundaries certain property generally located on the north side of Strecker Road, consisting of approximately 4.29 acres and with a street address of 340 Turnberry Place Drive, St. Louis County locator number 22U 610641, which is currently zoned R2 15,000 square foot resident district with a planned environment unit, PEU, Ward 2.
The ninth site, PZ 18-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of the Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the amendment and the change of the zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD parenthetical, Chapter 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD parenthetical, of the zoning ordinance, and including within such district boundaries, certain property generally located on the west side of Strecker Road, north of Sunny Ridge Drive, consisting of approximately 10.05 acres and with a street address of 1627 Idle Rock Farm Road, St. Louis County locator number 22U 220051, which is currently zoned R1A 22,000 square foot resident district, Ward 4.
And the 10th site is PZ 19-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the amendment and the change of the zoning district boundaries and classification of properties in the city by establishing the boundaries of the Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, Chapter 415.505, Special Circumstances Overlay District, SCOD, of the zoning ordinance, and including within such district boundaries certain property generally located on the west side of Strecker Road, north of Sunny Ridge Drive, consisting of approximately 4 acres and with a street address of 1650 Idle Rock Farms Road, St. Louis locator number 22U 2200224, which is currently zoned R1A 22,000 square foot resident district, Ward 4.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry and Mr. Vunich, for that. I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Vunich, to explain, I guess, what we are doing this evening for our guest online and in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Department of Planning has, as in the past, prepared a primer for the purposes of tonight's public hearings. As you witnessed, there are 10 locations that are being considered for the potential application of the Special Circumstances Overlay District. And as part of tonight's hearing, the Department of Planning would like to introduce into the record the following items: the city's charter, the city's master plan, Chapter 415, the zoning ordinance of the City of Wildwood's municipal code, the file that has been developed relating to these 10 sites and all contents contained therein, and then finally, any testimony, exhibits, plats, maps, or other information that is provided as part of tonight's hearing. In the primer, the Department of Planning identifies the 10 sites that are for consideration. And as part of that identification, the department notes that this particular process has been underway for the better part of 18 months. The first step in this process was the development of the regulations associated with the overlay district. Those regulations went through the Planning and Zoning Commission's public hearing process. There were a number of conversations that were held over the course of the period of time relating to their format, their impact, and certainly concerns about additions or subtractions. Ultimately, the Planning and Zoning Commission provided a favorable recommendation to City Council. City Council ultimately held its public hearing on the matter, and at the conclusion of the public hearing, authorized the preparation of legislation to adopt the overlay district as well as the associated regulations contained therein. That adoption now is Chapter 415.505, as is referenced in each of the 10 public hearing notices. The second step in the process was the development of categories for the consideration of properties. There are 6 categories, and for the most part, that process was concluded by the Planning and Zoning Commission in 2021, more of recent time. Those 6 categories range from any property that is listed on any federal, state, or local registry due to environmental hazards, to others that may come into the zoning process that present a unique challenge to the city of Wildwood and its decision-making bodies. Ultimately, the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended the adoption of the 6 categories, which was inclusive, again, of the direction to proceed forward with certain hearings. And then finally, that recommendation report from the Planning and Zoning Commission was forwarded to the City Council, where it was received and filed. Tonight is the third step in the overall process and the first to involve the zoning of individual properties potentially identified as suitable for the application of the overlay district. That, for the most part, is relative to the background component of the process that has led us to tonight's hearings. I think it's also important to note that there are certain characteristics that are associated with the 10 properties that are under consideration tonight. Several of those properties still remain on the national priorities list of the United States Environmental Protection Agency relative to their past use for certain activities that now are considered risk to the public's health, safety, and welfare. Other sites have been listed on the same national priorities list, but have been delisted due to cleanup activities associated with them and issuance of letters and actions by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. At least one of the sites has the recent establishment of an environmental covenant between the property owner and the United States Environmental Protection Agency due to a location being discovered upon it that represented, again, a risk to the public's health, safety, and welfare. And then finally, the category or the combination of properties that are immediately downstream from ephemeral drainage ways, or as described in the primer, conduits for the transportation of contaminants. Collectively, these are the sites that begin the process associated with the overlay district. The last component of the primer, for the most part, tries to explain what the intent of the overlay district is. And the first item in that list of 4, I think, is the most important. The intent of the overlay district is to manage new development on a site, not necessarily the use of an existing site for permitted accessory uses, structures, and buildings, etc. The intent of our overlay districts, and we have at least one other in the planned residential development overlay district, is to be applied when development, the intensification of the use of the property through either a change in zoning or the increase in units or square footage associated with new development. From the standpoint of the department, this means that certain activities will be permitted regardless of the overlay district's application or not. And those can be inclusive of property maintenance, removal of dead, disease, nuisance, or threatening trees, the installation and construction of certain improvements typically found in conjunction with existing single-family dwellings, such as outbuildings, patios, decks, etc. Also, the intent of the overlay district is not to preclude development of a site so designated. This was a key point in the development of the regulations, both at the Planning and Zoning Commission level and at City Council. The intent was to add greater scrutiny to these sites due to concerns about public health, safety, and welfare. The additional scrutiny may be expensive, but certainly if anyone were to reside on a property in a new residence, I think it is incumbent upon the city of Wildwood to ensure that the site is safe. How do you ensure safety? You create a process that ensures that all information from all entities that have an appropriate role participate in such review. And then finally, the department would note that the overlay district may not be applied to all 10 of these cited properties. Again, the department, through its review of record and topographic information, aerial photography, identified these as potential candidates. And I emphasize and underline potential. Without the benefit of a public hearing, comments from the property owners, neighbors, and others, to assume all 10 would be part of the first overlay district would be inappropriate. This is the first step in the process. The next step will be to hear comments tonight from the public, and then thereafter do the necessary research, data collection, and preparation of a report to ensure if a site is recommended for such, it is a site that needs such, not such so as to just do it for the sake of the process. And so with that, Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the department's available for any comments or questions you may have regarding the information contained in the primer. And then thereafter, the department will conclude its presentation, and then we'll begin the process of hearing from individuals that have submitted speaker cards or are part of our Zoom webinar tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry, I'll turn it over to you for speaker cards. I want to remind everybody that they have 5 minutes for comment, and we will entertain and hear all comments tonight.
Mr. Chair, are there any comments or questions from the commission members? Otherwise, I'll vacate the podium and let somebody else take the space. Thank you.
Seeing none, okay. Mr. Newberry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'll just give one additional reminder. If those speaking would please identify the properties that they, or the property or properties that they are speaking regarding. Mr. Chair, the first speaker's card is either Mr. or Ms. Belding.
Good evening. We are Patrick and Jenny Belding of 150 Strecker Road. Our property is directly adjacent to the 162 Strecker Road property. We oppose the inclusion of 157, 162, and 210 Strecker Road, along with the properties of 1627 and 1650 Idle Farms Road, Idle Rock Farms, as we do not believe that there is still scientific proof that these properties pose any or current or health and safety risk to the community. Further, as an adjacent property owner, we are concerned with the negative impact branding these properties without justified merit would have on the property values in our area. The rigorous and extremely expensive application and approval process that is being placed on these property owners to develop or maintain their property would create further support to our concerns of property devaluation. Further, it is confusing that if these properties pose a threat to the community, why would the city of Wildwood be pursuing a public sidewalk project on these same properties proposed to be placed in the SCUD? While we support the need for the SCUD, in cases where there is scientific proof the property continues to pose health and safety risks, we do not believe all of these properties should be included. We further question why, if properties 1627 and 1650 Idle Rock Farm is included, why would 1651 Idle Rock Farms be excluded, as the creek also runs through that property? We urge all members not to include the above named properties and to please vote carefully on this topic, as it affects the entire community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker card is Ms. Placeway.
Good evening. My name is Carrie Placeway. I'm here on behalf of my father. He resides at 157 Strecker Road. His property has been identified as the potential health and safety risk and falls under the proposed overlay district by the city of Wildwood. He has lived in his house for almost 40 years. Our family moved there when I was 6 years old. I am now 45 years old. My sister grew up in the house as well. None of us have had any health issues in regards to possible dioxin contamination. We can stand before you and be a testament that there should be no health and safety concerns with my father's property. We've also reviewed the characteristics of properties that would be subject to the SCOD overlay. We would like to request further information on how my father's property falls into any of these categories. In my original conversation with Mr. Newberry, he mentioned a creek on the Bliss property. The creek is far from my father's property. It's down a large hill coming nowhere near his land. Hopefully everyone has seen the creek's proximity to my father's land. If not, I would encourage all the members to educate themselves on the property's location. I have also been in contact with Linda Price with the EPA. She did provide me with their report from 2012. My father's property was never involved in this investigation, and we are confused as to why it is now being included 9 years later. Ms. Price also informed me that the EPA has offered to meet with the city of Wildwood to go over any misunderstandings, but that has not happened. I have also reached out to Mr. Newberry with the Wildwood Planning and Zoning, who did provide me with some initial information in regards to the overlay. I have emailed him twice since that conversation for a status of the meeting with the city and the EPA, but I have not received a response. I have also requested a copy of the report from the private company that Wildwood hired that found dioxin on the Prim and Callahan property, but he has not responded to my request. At this point, I am questioning the city's transparency. In regards to the EPA study, I find it odd that the EPA deemed these properties safe, but a private company hired by the city of Wildwood contradicted these findings. The dioxin that was discovered on the affected property originally was spread over the roads in the city of Times Beach, an area that is now a state park, safe enough to be enjoyed by thousands of people every year. I am confused as to how the EPA and the state of Missouri considered the cleanup of Times Beach acceptable enough to make it a state park, but somehow this plot of land in Wildwood is permanently contaminated. I also spoke with Ward 2 Council Member Don Bartoni, who informed me that the report that I requested from Mr. Newberry was public information and I was entitled to a copy. During our conversation, Mr. Bottoni stated he had heard the EPA was refusing to meet with the city of Wildwood. It appears that there are conflicting statements, which again is why I asked about the status of the meeting with the EPA. And again, I'm questioning the city's transparency. All of this has been a huge stress on my father, who is a longtime resident of the city of Wildwood. He is overwhelmed by the thought of his property value being reduced to next to nothing. And this keeps him up at night. He is 83 years old. His wife recently passed away a few months ago, and this is the last thing that he needs. If you put my father's property under this overlay, it will make it worthless. He has worked hard his entire life. You would be ruining everything he has worked for, taking away his livelihood. We take this as a personal attack. We ask that you sit back and think about this as the people involved, not just a piece of land. Should this overlay move forward, it would be an unjust, unfair, and unethical decision to treat a longtime resident in this manner. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mayor Boland.
Yes, I did not catch the address of the property, and if we could get that as well as the number that that address correlates to on the agenda, I would appreciate it.
I think it's 157 Strecker Road, item number 2.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker card is Ms. Tiffany Marquardt.
Good evening. I am speaking regarding 162 and 210 Strecker Road. My name is Tiffany Marquardt, and I am hoping to soon be a resident of Ward 4. I realize what I am about to say may sound unconventional at first, but if you bear with me for a moment, you will quickly understand the relevance to tonight's public hearing. I am speaking as an individual who has a master's degree in public health epidemiology and biostatistics with past positions at the CDC, Pennsylvania Department of Health, St. Louis County Department of Health, Jefferson County Department of Health, as well as an adjunct professor position at Lindenwood University and a position at Washington University School of Medicine. I have published several articles in scientific journals, including Clinical Infectious Disease, Emerging Infectious Disease, and Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, as well as spoken at numerous national public health conferences. I'm a wife, a mother, and a homeowner in Wildwood. Mayor Boland, did you have this building tested for Legionella prior to the public hearing this evening? It is summer. The AC is running more often in City Hall, and drinking fountains are being reopened after sitting stagnant for quite some time due to COVID. Aren't you concerned about the citizens of Wildwood contracting Legionnaire's disease while gathered in this building? Anywhere from 5 to 10% of those who contract this disease will die from it. Chairman Lee, were you tested for measles before you arrived tonight at the meeting? Yes, it may be rare and vaccine preventable, but it is on the rise in the US. In 2019, there were 13 reported outbreaks in this country of this highly contagious disease. Approximately 30% of cases reported have one or more complications, including death. Certainly not something we want to spread in our community. Commissioner Cohn, were you tested for tuberculosis before you arrived at this meeting tonight? TB is a leading cause of death due to infectious disease in the world. In the US in 2019, there were approximately 2.7 cases per 100,000 people. That doesn't sound like too much to you or me right now, but know that 13 million people in this country have latent TB, meaning that while they are not ill and infectious at this moment, at any time the bacteria can wake up, making them ill and infectious to others. This certainly sounds like something the community should be concerned about, correct? I'm going to make a big assumption that no, City Hall was not tested for Legionella, and the other 2 members did not go to the lab this afternoon for that testing. Why? Because there are no signs and symptoms to warrant testing for these conditions. If you showed up at your physician's office demanding a measles test, you would be counseled on your health. You have no fever, no rash, no respiratory symptoms, nothing. You're just scared you might die of this disease because you know of someone who has it and are fearful of getting it. While you do not have signs or symptoms, a test is not warranted. We do not test healthy people based on fear or paranoia. Testing is expensive, time-consuming, and frankly, a waste of the physician's time and resources that could be spent treating someone who is truly ill and needs help now, unless you have a sign or symptom or fit the case definition of an outbreak situation that warrants testing. So now the relevance to tonight's public hearing. In 2017, the Environmental Protection Agency delisted my property at 210 Strecker the former Callahan site. After extensive cleanup, the EPA performed testing at my property, and the results show the property is no longer contaminated and is suitable for unrestricted use. The Department of Natural Resources has stated exactly the same. In addition, several private environmental firms have concurred with additional phase 1 testing that the property is no longer a threat to public health and safety. There is absolutely no reason to continue requiring or promoting testing at 210 Strecker Road. There are no signs or symptoms of any environmental issues as stated by the EPA, DNR, and multiple private environmental firms. To continue enforcing restrictions on this property or my other property at 162 Strecker Road that was never even a concern for the EPA in the first place is a complete waste of time, resources, and money. While environmental professionals from multiple agencies have stated that no further testing is needed at this property, the city of Wildwood is continuing to state otherwise and disagree with the environmental professionals. I am demanding that you use professional judgment backed by science to make your determinations rather than choosing to use fear-based alarmist decisions that will continue costing extreme amounts of time, resources, and money of Wildwood residents. By including my 2 properties in the SCOD, you are telling the community to be fearful of something that has no signs or symptoms, just as I described above when I tried to invoke a little bit of alarm about 3 highly contagious diseases that could affect those here tonight. I would much rather see Wildwood spend taxpayer dollars preventing deaths from existing issues, such as the 16 preventable car crash fatalities in Wildwood within the past 5 years, by using resources to fix the roads as the city has been advised, again, by professionals. One of my young children is more likely to be killed by a car speeding down Strecker Road past my home than by a hypothetical fear-based cancer that may or may not be attributed to an environmental issue in the future. I want to address public health concerns that are supported by evidence-based science, not ones that are merely based in fear due to past resolved issues. Yes, the former Callahan site had issues in the past, but it is no longer a threat to public health and safety. The paint-related waste and solvents were cleaned up, the area retested, and found to have no concerns. Never was dioxin detected at my property. We are now at the 4th goal of the EPA's Superfund program, which is to return Superfund sites to productive use. It is now time to conclude that 210 Strecker Road is clean, ready for unrestricted use, and allow us, the new homeowners, to bring this property back to a beautiful horse farm as it was in the past. We want our neighbors to enjoy seeing our beautiful property and be proud to live in the area with us, just as we want to be proud of our property. We want to raise our young children in the safe, beautiful Wildwood area. We would never consider raising our young family here if it was not safe for them. And in my professional opinion, after reviewing all the documentation related to my property, a property that has been extensively tested, I know my property is safe as concluded by the EPA. Please do not include 162 or 210 Strecker in the SCOD and cause my family and neighbors undue stress to maintain our properties as well as devalue our properties. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker card is Mr. Dwayne Markwart.
Mr. Chairman, do we get 5 minutes for each property group? Mr. Chairman?
Sorry, you'll have 5 minutes for your presentation.
All right, well, I'm going to do 2 of them. One is a letter from a grandma and grandpa, and another one is following the process that Mr. Vunich discussed regarding 1627 and 1650 Idle Rock Farm Road should not be included in the SCOD. And so you guys all have my handouts, I hope, correct? You have it there, Mayor? And it says about the Special Circumstance Overlay District. And it says that they've been identified for considerations because of the 6 categories that Joe mentioned. The one category that they are is any property, lot, parcel, or ground or tract of land located downstream from the site that has been delisted. The watershed from 210 Strecker Road does pass south and west and cross over portions of the property of Idle Rock Road. And then so if you just note on that map there that I provided to you, carefully the relationship of the property lines and the Dry Creek path. I know that you realize at high water levels that'll do that. And so then there's the characteristics that the planning and zoning will consider. And then there's 6 characteristics regarding that. And number 1, not all property created equal. That doesn't apply to this one at 1627 or 1650. Not all properties provide a good stewardship. That's not a reason to include this in the SCOD. Number 3, there's nothing in category 3 that warrants includes in that because of not most favorable land designations. Number 4, some properties have special hazards associated with them that pose immediate and dangerous threats to anyone. Category 4 is not a reason to include 1627 and 1650 Idle Rock Road. The watershed is no longer an issue. The properties of 16 and 27 and 1650 Idle Rock Road do not pose immediate dangers or threats to anyone. And then category 5 is not a reason to include those because the property is vacant. Those intrinsic values can be better dealt with by the City of Wildwood's municipal code. And then number 6, category applies because the watershed issue at those two properties has been resolved. And so in summary, we discussed the criteria for inclusion of the SCOD as outlined by planning and zoning, and we've demonstrated there's nothing that warrants the recommendation to include those properties as outlined by the planning and zoning in your process. The next thing that I guess is they're going to try to squeeze this into me, so I'm going to just keep going. Thank you so much. Is you have this letter too, I hope. Is that right, Travis? Thank you. So I'm not going to have to read it all to you. I'm going to skip all of the things that, this a very small but very local group of citizens that are continually insistent with paranoia and false claims about the Marquardt property. They're critical of their community and they make many disparaging comments about the community and their neighbors. And so I have a list of 20 exaggerations that I've heard over and over and over and over again. I believe this cloud of negative private citizens, thanks, Ed, the citizens has triggered abrasive dealings with some, but not all city employees and officials. Some city employees and officials have been fantastic to us and some haven't been so good. Somebody mentioned they don't answer emails. There was a city government member making negative statements about Scott, even though they never even met Scott before, never even talked to him. And so I'll let you read all of those. So a private individual may be demanding, but insistent, but be distrustful. They may be discourteous. They may hide from communication, ignore the facts, immediately make the same demands, exaggerate the situation. And all those things can be that individual's right. But a public official is almost the opposite. Public officials are completely aware of their responsibilities. It's a very serious business. And that's each of you commission members. They impact individual lives, family, and the community. They know how to invest time and resources and money appropriately. Now, what I ask you to do when you get involved in this SCOD regarding these properties that we discussed is demand from your staff only written and clear evidence of their statements and positions. It's been unfortunate and probably embarrassing that errors have occurred in the past, like the Ellisville address that was put in a Wildwood thing or the publication in the wrong wards. All right. And so those things might be embarrassing, but application of this legislation is based on your personal recommendations is very critical. Staff not providing with the best defensible position possible is more seriously than it is embarrassing. Your personal recommendation at this stage not only goes to the core of your integrity, each committee member, but is life-changing and will set the tone going forward. Demand from the staff that they not put you into an uncomfortable position. Be sure all parties communicate with you as well as the property owners. Insist they provide you the documentation for properties considered by the Planning and Zoning Commission. This is not a race. This is a responsibility. Please be proud to know that the citizens that you represent realize the outcome is based on your decision. Realize your personal efforts help avoid the mistakes of recommending any undeserving property be included in the restrictions outlined in the SCOD. I have 2 more paragraphs. This is an opportunity to clear the air of negativity. Demonstrate your ability to handle this at the level of public responsibility. Let the private individuals that want to make the noise have their opinions, but do not grant them permission to personally threaten others and the reputation of the city of Wildwood. We want to thank each of you for allowing me to address your body on this very serious legislation. Your position is tremendous importance and carries unbelievable responsibility. My wife, Elaine, and I respect you for accepting that responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker card is Mr. Scott Marquardt.
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Scott Marquardt. My wife Tiffany and I, we are the proud owners of the properties at 162 and 210 Strecker Road. I'm going to be speaking about both of those properties this evening, and they both have very unique characteristics. Therefore, I'm going to ask that I am granted about 6.5 minutes to be able to get through my information this evening.
We're trying ve-
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'm sorry. We're having multiple speakers on the same property and with all due respect, as I'm sure you know, granting additional time to one speaker versus everyone is simply not appropriate or allowable. So I'll let the chairman speak, but Mr. Markwood, that's just not possible.
Mr. Mayor, I'm speaking on two individual properties that are two separate items on your agenda this evening. And I was informed of this. This decision was made by the commission today, and therefore I did not have time to make appropriate accommodations to that.
Well, I'm sorry, we can defer to the city attorney, Mr. Markwood, but I just don't think that even the fact that you're speaking on two separate properties is allowable. To go beyond what we're giving everyone else as a matter of fairness, the same opportunity to comment on. And so I would ask you with all due respect to please comply with that. If the city attorney wants to, or the chair wants to say something different relative to that, they can feel free to do so, obviously. Thank you.
About 30 minutes ago, I was granted this authorization from Mr. Vunich.
Which numbers are you, or what's the address that you're after here? So we can write this down.
Certainly, please. It's 162 Strecker Road. And the other property is 210 Strecker Road.
Okay, which is the same that we just heard. So if you have new information that we have not
I
heard,
do,
you can
yes.
present that.
Yes, absolutely. And according to my understanding of the rules of this meeting, that there is no regulations limiting the number of speakers that can speak on any one property. So therefore, I would like to continue.
You can continue, but we'll let you know when 5 minutes arises. Go ahead.
So today we're here because the commission stated that these properties represent a current public health and safety risk. As stated, or as will be stated by Mr. Piontek, our environmental expert, as well as numerous other completely independent firms, the properties on the south side of Strecker Road do not possess any public health risk. And statements to the contrary by the commission are irresponsible without any scientific data to support such statement. Mr. Lee, did the commission receive our request asking for information to support the claim? The reason I ask is because I have not received a response. So 210 Strecker Road does not qualify for inclusion in the circumstance district because it fails to meet the 6 characteristics that Mr. Vunich outlined this evening. The first characteristic is that any property that has been listed or delisted from a registry leading to a determined or yet to be determined public health risk. 210 Strecker Road was formerly listed. The EPA, the Department of Natural Resources, as well as numerous independent studies have each declared that the property is now safe for unrestricted use. As stated in the municipal code of the city of Wildwood, the intent of the district is to protect health and the environment. Due to the extensive work done to clean the property of the prior contamination, no additional restrictions are needed. The second element is that any property that is located downstream of a site that meets the first requirement. This property is not downstream of a site and therefore does not qualify. The third requirement is any property that has been identified in a phase 1 assessment needing a phase 2. Now, while 210 Strecker Road has in the past required a phase 2 assessment, the property no longer has that requirement. A phase 1 report in 2019 and an independent report in 2021 did not identify a need for a phase 2 or additional testing. A phase 1 report in 2020 mentions dioxin levels, but as Mr. Piontek is going to testify, this report incorrectly associated contamination from the Bliss site to the 210 Strecker Road property. He states that there will be no scientific evidence suggesting additional testing is needed. The fourth criteria is any property that has located upon it in the main channel or a floodway. This is not the case. Fifth characteristic is properties that have a steep slope. This is not the case. The sixth characteristic is any property that becomes a threat to public health, or if the owner requests it. Since I am the property owner and I know that the property is not a threat to the health, I do not want 210 Strecker Road included. Therefore, 210 Strecker Road historically met 2 of the 6 criteria for consideration. just as you would not continue to subject yourself to a life of isolation and regular measles tests because you are identified or because you were infected as a child. 210 Strecker Road is cured and does not require the intense scrutiny that the overlay district would provide. Now, I would like to speak on the separate property at 162 Strecker Road. None of the 6 criteria apply to this property. Now, about a minute and a half of that time was taken up by the mayor. Okay. So 210 Strecker Road does not meet any of the criteria. It has never posed a public health risk. The property is at the top of the hill and is not downstream. A phase 1 has been performed and never recommended additional assessments. The property is not in a floodway for a listed watershed. It is not a slope that requires protection. And the property owner does not wish for the property to be listed. Therefore, my wife Tiffany talked about the need to allocate the city's limited and valuable resources to support causes with scientific evidence. Kurt, our attorney, is going to talk about the responsibility of the commission to set aside their personal agenda. Keith Biontek, the Wildwood resident and the environmental expert with 35 years of experience, says that 210, there is factual evidence to support the EPA's position.
Mr. Chair.
He was unable to find evidence to support the assertion that the Callahan property poses any potential.
Yeah,
safety.
we're at 5 minutes, Scott, so we understand your concerns.
According to my time, we're at 4:55. So can I have another 20 seconds, please?
If you can wrap it up.
Thank you. I appreciate your consideration. Josh Stockstill, a real estate agent, is going to come on in a few minutes via Zoom and talk about how property values are going to be diminished. My father talked about his concerns. So, there's not factual evidence to support the inclusion of 210 Strecker Road. And given that 210 Strecker Road is not included, there is no evidence whatsoever to support inclusion of 162. I ask that you please take your responsibilities seriously and do not consider these properties for inclusion in the overlay district. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker card is Ms. Simone.
Ronald Reagan once said, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are."
Ma'am, would you state your name and address, please?
My name is
Thank you.
Emily Moan. I live at 1026 Timberfield Drive. Ronald Reagan once said, "The 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help." My name is Emily. I am speaking on behalf of my 83-year-old grandfather who resides at 157 Strecker Road. My grandfather is proud to live in Wildwood. As his family, we are fighting so that the city government does not steal his life's work. He purchased the house over 40 years ago. He made renovations to his property and worked extremely hard his entire life to make his dream happen. This new overlay is completely unethical and not logical. I have researched and majored in environmental science for many years. In all of my education, I have never heard of a contamination site spreading 9 years later. It does not make sense that dioxin was spread up a hill to my grandfather's house when the natural movement from gravity would be downhill and downstream. Dioxins are naturally found everywhere in the environment. The report about the spread of dioxin said that it was spread all down Strecker Road over 50 years ago. So it would have already started breaking down, meaning there's less contamination than there was in 1970. My grandfather's house is 0.2 miles away from the creek that was deemed contaminated, even though dioxins are found to be hydrophobic, which means they repel water. So why isn't all of Wildwood being deemed contaminated? And why are the houses that are closer to the creek not said to be contaminated and not part of the new overlay by the company that you hired privately, despite the EPA deeming it safe? There are houses that surround where the contaminated creek empties. So why are those houses not contaminated as well? A dioxin contamination would harshly affect the environment. We would have seen a huge decline in wildlife, which has never happened. We've seen more deer, birds, frogs, and raccoons than ever before. We would also see that our plant life would not be healthy. We grow a thriving garden every year. I have grown up eating from my grandfather's garden and have never had any negative effects on my health. Dioxins are believed to be a carcinogen and cause other health problems, which none of my family has ever experienced. Wildwood needs to stop wasting time, money, and energy on this project, especially when a councilman's property is magically skipped by the overlay, but the surrounding properties are included. These people have worked their entire lives for their home, and all you are doing is taking it away so that you can make a profit, exactly like what happened at Times Beach. So please, let the people of Wildwood continue living their lives and bettering their homes without the negative city government that is extorting this issue for profit. And please, explain to me how this new overlay is scientifically possible since the EPA has deemed it safe. You have great residents that you have never taken the time to know that truly want to better Wildwood, their homes, and deserve to have what they worked for, as well as a better city government. So if you really are here to help, then help my grandfather and the others affected by this overlay to keep the value of their homes. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker card is Mr. Piontek.
Hello, my name's Keith Piontek. I reside at 4617 Vixen Circle, Ward 6. I'm going to offer some remarks from the perspective of a professional engineer, specifically regarding the 210 Strecker Road property. I've been in the environmental business for 35 years. Throughout that period, I've been involved in the investigation and management of chemically contaminated properties. And so what I've done is gone through the project record, or as many documents as I could obtain, to assess the factual basis for the statement that this 210 Strecker Road property represents a current public health and safety risk. Going through the project record, the first thing that pops out is the extensive work that's been done by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. 2 removal actions that remove the identified zone of soil contamination down to bedrock. Scores of environmental samples that were collected and analyzed. And based on that, that action, those testing results, EPA went through this delisting process that included opportunity for public comment and providing response to concerns that were raised. So they've gone through a very rigorous sequence of events that's very thoroughly documented and concluded that the Callahan subsite, the 210 Strecker Road property is part of the Callahan subsite, meets the criteria for unlimited use and unrestricted exposure. I've also looked at the studies that are apparently the basis for the assertion that the Callahan property poses a public health risk. The most recent of these is this November 2020 Phase 1 Environmental Assessment Report. This was done for the sidewalk project, but it covered the 162 and 210 Strecker Road properties. And the conclusion of this report is based on they acknowledge the EPA findings, but they state that based on more recent reporting from March 2016, this site is still contaminated at levels greater than what is acceptable for residential land use. And here they're obviously referring to the former Callahan site. They go into more detail in this report on what they're basing that statement on. And it states that, well, they reference this March 2016 ESC report, which I see is attached to the zoning primer that was handed out tonight. And they talk about how that report identified several issues with the 2014 cleanup. And they take exception to the dioxin criteria that was used in that cleanup. There's a problem there. Dioxins have never been found on the Callahan subsite. that 2016 report is dealing with a different subsite. And that leads to some serious confusion. I see in tonight's materials that the Sacred Heart of Jesus Catholic Church provided some public comments, and they're citing those same results, which are false. There's quite a bit of confusion in the project record, and it's based on this 2020 report interpretation of the March 2016 ESC report. So I've gone through this 2016 ESC report, and I find that right there on the first page, it states this is about the Strecker Forest and Bliss properties. They're analyzing data from those properties, not the Callahan subsite. You go through this report and you don't find anything until the last paragraph on the last page that's specific to the Callahan property. And it says that further investigation of the Callahan property was not conducted after chemicals were identified during a groundwater well installation. Well, you know, where is this well? It doesn't say. When did they test it? It doesn't say. What chemicals did they find? It doesn't say. What report did this statement come from? It doesn't say. So in short, I go through the two reports that are apparently the basis for this conclusion or preliminary conclusion that this site poses a public health risk, and I don't find a darn thing. So those are my remarks as a professional engineer. The EPA report carries a lot, the EPA process carries a lot more weight with me than these two reports commissioned by
Chair.
the city of Wildwood.
We're at 5 minutes. Can you wrap this up? I mean, this was very good information.
Well, the good news is Mr. Vujnic earlier tonight said that the process is going to include a preparation of documentation, you know, that would establish whether or not it's appropriate for each of these properties to be included in the SCOD. That's great. That really needs to be done here because I'm not seeing any evidence the Callahan subsite should be included. So I'm glad that's part of the process. It's a very important process, and I would urge the commission not to vote to include that Callahan subsite in the SCOD unless and until there's a sound factual basis for doing so. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker card is for Mitchell Peters.
Good evening. My name is Mitchell Peters. I live at 1606 Inglebrook Court. I've lived there almost 25 years. My kids grew up there. We moved there when they were 4 and 10. They were friends with Mrs. Callahan. They actually did odd jobs for her. They fished in the pond. They ate fish out of the pond. We were aware that chemicals had been stored there at one time. She assured us that it was cleaned up. The kids played all over the property. Neither them nor their children now have any health effects from being on the property. I feel the property's safe. In the 24 years that we've lived there, it's been tested numerous times. There's been efforts to develop it. All of those efforts were stifled. I believe there's one resident that has run for the board numerous times that is pushing this agenda, and she's been soundly defeated numerous times. There's no scientific evidence that's ever been presented to us that there's a problem. I feel that this SCOD is not needed. I believe that the permit process through the city of Wildwood can handle any development or issues. I feel that this is a waste of taxpayer time and dollars and city resources. I feel that it's going to hurt my property value. My property abuts the small pond on the Callahan property. And if the drainage was to my house, it would be underwater. So the drainage is down from Strecker Road and over onto the former Callahan property now owned by the Markwarts. I very much want the property cleaned up. It's been in disrepair for 5 to 6 years. The fence is down. There's a lot of brush, dead brush, trees, grass. My biggest health concern on the Callahan property is from mice, ticks, coyotes, mosquitoes, and other vermin. And if the property was cleaned up, I believe that I would be much safer. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Newberry?
Mr. Chair, the next speaker card is for Mr. Roger Wakery. Forgive me, Roger, if I mispronounce your last name.
Good evening, folks. Roger Wackerly, Ward 2. Without being repetitive, I'm going to read a small excerpt from a document that I pulled out from the EPA concerning 210 Strecker Road, and also speaking out against the SCOD on 157 and 162. I think it's important to hear the exact verbiage that the EPA has written about this property, more so concerning the Callahan property. The Environmental Protection Agency, Region 7, announces the deletion of the Callahan property operable unit parcel ID 22U220242 of the Ellisville Superfund. The EPA removed all contaminated soil down to the bedrock at the Callahan subsite, then collected confirmation samples on the sidewalls to confirm that cleanup was achieved both vertically and laterally. EPA considers that all contaminants of concern in the site soil above cleanup criteria were removed from the Callahan subsite. Therefore, there is not contamination to disturb through future construction. PCBs and dioxin were not detected above a cleanup criteria and not considered contaminants of concern at the Callahan subsite. The EPA conducted a groundwater investigation at the property where 3 wells were installed and then sampled. All groundwater samples at the Callahan subsite were non-detect for contaminants of concern. Indoor air sampling was not conducted at the residential homes near the Callahan subsite, since all impacted soil was removed from the site and the groundwater is not impacted with contamination. The EPA considers there is no pathway, NO, for the vapor intrusion. The EPA determined all threats to public action have been addressed and that the Callahan subsite meets the criteria for unlimited and unrestricted exposure. This has been going on far too long, and it's time for the city to start listening to the science that's being provided here tonight. After 20 years plus, someone finally started to maintain this parcel and began a cleanup. And now apparently the city has put a stop work order on this property. And now I have to look at 3-foot grass, overgrown vegetation again, that is a safe haven for unwanted varmints. I think it's rather comical and ironic that the city wants to impose these restrictions and in the same breath ask for an easement relief from the homeowner. The city is already involved in an expensive lawsuit with the landowner across the street. And it's my opinion, and that is my opinion, you're about ready to get involved in another one. Stop wasting the Wildwood taxpayers in these frivolous lawsuits that's destroying the property values around my neighborhood and others. I'm tired of losing lawsuits in this city. Where does this stop? Is my subdivision next? I'm tired of the city catering to a very small group of people in Wildwood. Stop this nonsense, folks, and let's spend some money on something worthwhile, like a sidewalk that I've been trying to put in for 20 years. That is a filled sidewalk. Nothing's being dug. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker card is Mr. Don Winkle.
Good evening, Don Winkle, 224 Strecker Farms Court, Wildwood, Ward 2. I'd like to echo everything Roger Wackerly just said. I would also like to state that if in fact it is true that there is a city council person who has property adjacent to the properties in question, then, and that property was omitted from this list, that's a problem that needs to be addressed and investigated, because there's no way something like that should happen. I've been living in my home for 26 years. I'm 60 years old. Haven't been sick for the last 26 years. And my house is adjacent to some of this property that we're talking about here today. For those of you who weren't around 5 years ago, which was the last time I spoke here at one of these meetings, as of 5 years ago, the city had spent over almost $700,000 on fees to ESC, which is Environmental Stewardship Corporation. And at the time that those fees were paid, there was a local company that was willing to do that job for half the price. And for whatever reason, the city council chose environmental stewardship instead. They paid them twice as much for a report that was such a gobbledygook of mistakes that they had to pay them an extra $50,000 to come back and try to fix the report that they sent out originally. For the record, environmental stewardship was kicked off of a United States government federal project in Wisconsin, I believe, because their work was not unbiased. In other words, they came looking for the answer that they got. And how it would have been that we could have hired a company like that 5 years ago, and that somehow or another, we're still using that report that was totally debunked in 2016 as a justification to go after these properties this evening, is truly extraordinary. The piece of paper I'm looking at, I'm a homeowner in Strecker Farms subdivision. The piece of paper I'm looking at here says, and I don't exactly pretend to know what this means, but the Planning and Zoning Commission would note that 4 other property categories remain and may be the subject of future hearings as well. So again, does that mean Strecker Farms or any of the nearby subdivisions that are adjacent to this property? Are we going to be looking at this at some time in the future? That's something that, if that's in the cards and you all are considering that, say it now. I appreciate your time this evening. I hope that we can get back to science, because that's not what this seems to be about. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, I have the final speaker card for those in attendance here at City Hall, but I want to take the time to acknowledge that there are 3 individuals who have indicated on Zoom that they would like to speak. We will get to them next. The next speaker card is Ms. Countryman.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Countryman. I live at 223 Strecker Farms Court. And I would just like to say I agree with everything Roger Wackerly and Don Winkle had to say. We've been impacted by what has happened to the Bliss property and the Callahan property. My husband and I moved to Strecker Farms in 1997 and raised 3 sons there and been very happy in our neighborhood. And so we've been very interested in what's been going on with the EPA cleanup. I did attend a meeting at Lafayette High School several years ago where the EPA sent a representative in from Kansas City and listened to her testimony. And she convinced me that that property is clean. I felt comfortable about living there ever since. I look at the properties and I think it needs some attention both from the city of Wildwood to make sure that we can use that property since it has been deemed safe. I remember hearing about the park down at Times Beach when I was a kid. And if they can clean that up and parents feel safe bringing their children to that property, I don't see why here in Wildwood we can't do the same. There are all kinds of vermin living in there, I'm sure. My son and I have been walking by the property and would love to have that sidewalk that Mr. Wackerly talked about there. But I remember when I talked to the toxicologist that came from KC and I talked to her personally. And she said, Marcia, you can drink water off the little puddles on the property. It's that safe. You're more in danger eating a steak off your grill in your backyard than you are walking around and doing things on that property. So I think our goal is, I actually have a PhD in accounting. I teach strategic decision-making and about sunk costs. Right now, what happened to that property was in the past. We can talk about it like history, but what we need to do now is realize the costs and the benefits from the past of that property is in the past. It's irrelevant to decision-making today. Today, we need to look at what our options are, decide what those alternatives are, what are the costs and benefits of those alternatives, and then make the best decision for the residents of Wildwood. That's what we need to do. So if the EPA says it's safe, one of our alternatives should be just to go ahead and let people who own that property use it in the best way they see fit with no restrictions like the EPA talked about. What are other alternatives going down the road you're talking about with this special restriction, with high costs for legal fees or other work on the property, and then putting down the properties of our homes in that area? And then also what Mr. Winkle talked about with worry for our subdivisions. We've been there going through this for 20 some years. My husband and I are original homeowners. We signed off on the risk knowing what happened around us. But with the work of Wildwood in the past, the EPA and whoever the other group is, I forget, the national something or other, we feel good living there and living our lives. But we want to reduce the risk of selling it for less money for sure. We want to reduce our worry for living there because every time this comes up, I get nervous, and I'm not nervous to live in the property and breathe and dig on my land. I'm nervous because what the city of Wildwood or some attorney might do to us, our families and our group as citizens of Wildwood. I see a bigger risk from what you're doing to us than anything we could possibly do on that property. I would go and have a picnic any day on a nice blanket there and eat and drink and have fun with my neighbors. But if somebody comes up and says, oh, you shouldn't be here, or you might be hurt here, even though I know the EPA said I'm fine, those people coming at me worry me because they're making things more difficult than we should be. So thank you so much for listening to me. I'm a mom. I raised 3 boys there, and I want the best for all the citizens of Wildwood. And I think if the EPA says it's safe, several tests have been safe, I don't know why we keep spending time and money and worrying our residents and decreasing our home values. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Newberry, you can let those online in.
Yes, sir. The first speaker who's attending via Zoom is Mr. Stockstill. It'll take a moment to let him in.
Can you guys hear me okay? Wonderful. Okay, I'm Joshua Stockstill. I am the broker for Narrative Real Estate licensed in the state of Missouri. And I was actually involved in the residential home purchase of 162 Strecker and the land purchase at 210 Strecker. I've come to you to talk today a little bit about the impact this can have on the land and the property as it exchanges hands. Because anytime we do a zoning issue, it's not just what it does to the property now and its uses, but also how does it exchange hands in the future and move its deed from one person to the next. And what we found over time is restrictions and warnings put in place have a significant impact on property value. One of the things I think we note most when you look at floodplains. A floodplain may just cost a new homeowner $200 per month on flood insurance, but in generally, you see a 20% decrease in property value just because you are in that floodplain by comparison. My concern for the citizens of Wildwood as a whole is when you have something like SCODE, you are putting new things in place that are going to cause a kind of gap in education among citizens at first and among buyers. So one of the things I have to ask, and I talk to a buyer about when we're looking at a property that even backs up to something like 210 Strucker, is who owns the land behind your home? This is a nice developed subdivision where homes sell at $500,000, but you're going to back to what looks like a common ground property. What has happened to that land? How is it zoned? How does it work? The warning we would have to naturally give a buyer that we are representing in that is if it's classified as SCODE, it means that there are special circumstances that one could eventually impact their property in the future, even though it wasn't specifically designated as an EPA site. So I think in a general look, we have to make sure we acknowledge that first, those properties specifically designated as SCODE are going to have an impact on their value. The second piece to that value is surrounding properties are also going to be impacted by that designation, even if they aren't the property in question. Any of our brokers and realtors acting in the area who are doing their due diligence and serving their clients well are going to check into that. And the listing agent who's doing their job to make sure they're disclosing to the public is going to make sure that they're making that aware to future clients. I think it's been noted many times, but a lot of this has been in the past and it's been tried to be resolved. And even the property and land at 210 Strucker, the history and reputation of the land alone meant it took 10 years for that property to sell. And it did not sell at value just because of a reputation for having an EPA restriction that had since been lifted. So imagine they designated something that had a permanent value on it. My second real concern with this SCODE is really the implementation it has on homeowners and then what that will do to the surrounding area when it comes to terms of upkeep. We see this often as a homeowner stays in a home. The harder and more challenging it is for a homeowner to apply for a permit and go through a process to make updates to their home, the less likely they are to do it. And then when people are less likely to do it, it impacts the entire neighborhood. It's just not that home or that single residence itself. I appreciate that I believe the commission has thought through that a lot of these things that are natural to a home are going to be excluded from this, whether it's a deck or a mailbox. The challenge you're going to have is there's going to be an educational gap between what citizens believe and what they hear, which means if somebody's designated under this, they're going to hesitate to do those repairs because they don't know if they will be approved or not. They don't know if they're excluded or not. That fear can have people hesitate to make the updates necessary to keep the community and the value nearby where it needs to be. We don't want this to happen in Wildwood where first you've got a thriving community there. And when we talk to buyers, it's a land where there's opportunity to have space, to grow a family, to have your farm, to really make things work here. Our story's going to change when we make things change there. So I just urge the commission, as you look at these properties individually, be very careful as we make this designation, because it doesn't just impact a single property owner, it impacts those people next to it as well. It's going to impact their home values and how things are cared for in Wildwood in the future. I thank you guys for your time and my ability to make comments today.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker on Zoom is Mr. Kurt Marquardt. Again, it'll take him a moment to come in.
Hello?
You're on. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. My name is Kurt Marquardt. My address is 2345 Grand, Kansas City, Missouri. I'm here to speak about sites 3 and 7, 162 and 210 Strecker Road. For transparency's sake, I'd like to tell you that I am the uncle of the owners of the property, Scott and Tiffany Marquardt. They currently live on a 2.5 acre lot just off of 141 near Kennedy High School, and I've been looking for a number of years to upgrade, and we're so excited when they found this acreage in the middle of town, close to work, schools, and churches, and in a good community. They have met nice and encouraging neighbors, and they're excited about their chance to raise their family in such an environment. However, there is a shadow over this happiness that should not be there. Their new property is part of an area that has been proposed to be included in a special circumstances overlaying district. Experts in their field from the EPA and the Missouri DNR have done comprehensive analysis of their property. Their findings do not support the inclusion of the Marquardt property in this ordinance and its restrictions. I will not address this. You already have the scientific explanation. A cursory look at the proposed ordinance and restrictions of the Marquardt property by the Special Circumstances Overlay District reveals many areas of concerns about this overreaching wide regulation. In Scott's effort to work with the city on this issue, there have been a number of events that have made it feel as if there is an error. This is what's going to happen, and it's a done deal. Some of these events are city officials being evasive, taking weeks or more to respond to emails or phone calls. City officials unable to answer simple questions without first discussing with the city attorney. City officials not providing public records on time and at the deadline informing that it'll be additional weeks. Public statements made by city officials stating that Scott needs to learn that new residents need to follow the rules and that he has a bug in his craw about the ordinance and he's not being cooperative. And these statements were made by someone who had never even spoken to or visited with Scott about these issues. There's also a small but very vocal group of private citizens who have approached Scott with their paranoia and false claims about the property, the community, and even Scott personally. City officials made statements that no matter the outcome of the reports of studies done on the sites, that they don't trust the outcome, that regardless of the results, they can't imagine it making a difference. This proposal is not without obvious problems, some of which I believe are going to be taken up at the end of this meeting, including property in Ellisville that was proposed to be included in the district and should not have been and could not have been included. There are parts of other properties that have the qualities to be included in the overlay district, but are not and probably should be. These actions are arbitrary and capricious, and that reasonable diligence was not used to determine the facts necessary to make the decisions. Also, proper consideration of the facts relevant to the decision was not given for a number of reasons, including an express prejudice in the city against the EPA and its experts. As an attorney, I ask why the hesitancy to be transparent? Why the resistance to accepting facts? Why request studies and then declare your intent to act a certain way before you even see the results or the data is reviewed? Why is the city being punitive rather than encouraging and positive and helpful? The problems at the properties on Strecker Road are nothing new. There's no imminent threat requiring immediate action. I ask that you review the Marquardt property on its own factors. The commission should take the additional time necessary to get any action it wants to take fairly and accurately decided. Look into the genesis of this special district. Is someone pushing a private agenda? Do they repeatedly exaggerate an emotional viewpoint? Are they creating an environment of paranoia and intimidation? Are they able to recruit others to take actions on their behalf? Do they demand solutions based on exerting more control? Are they infringing on others' rights? Do they seek unequal application?
1 minute.
I encourage you to look closely to see if you think there may be some aspects of this planning and zoning process that are being influenced by a private agenda. If there is, I encourage you to get rid of them. Public officials are held to a high standard. They perform their duties for the good of all citizens. They have an impact on the lives of individuals, families, and the community as a whole. I encourage you to look closely at all aspects of this proposed overlay district, ensure that the actions taken are not arbitrary or capricious, and that all relevant facts are given proper consideration. Every member must be careful that they receive documented and undeniable reasons to include a property into the overlay district. Be proud to have your citizens realize the outcome is based on your decision and your personal efforts helped avoid the mistake of recommending any undeserving property be included into the restrictions outlined in the overlay district. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, the next speaker from Zoom is Ms. Phillips. Just give me a moment.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Lisa Phillips. I reside at 1614 Inglebrook Court, which is west of 210 Strecker Road, directly adjacent to the property. We moved in August of 1990, and I felt compelled to read a report that I received back in the 90s. Because everyone's talking about recent studies. Well, I can share a study that was put together a very long time ago. When we first moved in, we heard rumors of contaminants and dioxin on the Callahan property. And as you can imagine, as a young mother, I was freaked out. And I reached out to the state of Missouri, the Department of Natural Resources, and I asked them for what was going on in the study. And they sent me a letter that was dated April 22nd, 1991. And I would like to read that letter to you. As you requested, encloses information regarding previous sampling at the Callahan property, included our site maps, excerpts from the remedial investigation and feasibility study reports, an old fact sheet, and a dioxin investigated report. These investigations were limited to the property currently owned by Mr. Callahan. It apparently did not include any sampling west of Callahan's current property line in the area, which has been developed as a housing subdivision in recent years. As stated in the reports, none of the collected samples indicated the presence of contaminants. I hope this letter will be of help to you. If you would like to view our files for this site, you are welcome to make an appointment. Please contact me if I can be of further assistance. Sincerely, Stephen Sturgis, Environmental Specialist. Attached to the April 22nd, 1991 was a fact sheet and the actual investigative analytics that was produced by the department dated 9/21 of 1983. The summary of the report reads, based on the analytical results, there are no contaminated soils on the Jean Ellen Callahan property. It's going on 38 years from the time that study has been conducted, and the study back then revealed that there were no contaminants, no dioxin on the property. 38 years, I asked the council respectfully, when is enough enough? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ms. Phillips, was that letter addressed to you, or is that something that the city has a copy of? Oh, she left. Joe, could you look into that letter and get a copy of that?
Yes, sir. We have her name and we'll contact her either by mail. If we can find the telephone number, we'll give her a call.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Newberry.
Mr. Chair, I have no further speaker cards from those in attendance here at City Hall and no others identifying with the raise hand feature or via chat that they wish to speak in attendance at the Zoom meeting.
Okay, we'll move on to the commission. Mayor Boland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first of all want to thank everyone who was on Zoom and attended in person tonight to talk about this important issue. And one question I have, I guess, to Joe or Travis, in roughly 2016, shortly after I became mayor, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment, we developed a white paper on the Callahan site, and that site has its numbers on the list of the public hearing properties for this evening. My question is, I didn't see it, so I may have missed it, but has that white paper been provided to members of the commission?
Mr. Mayor, when asked, I certainly provide the white paper that was prepared by the city. I provided it, I believe, to the Marquarts. It is available on our website, and certainly anybody that would like to review it can review it. But if there are anyone on it here in attendance at City Hall or on Zoom would like to get a copy, if they can just email me, I'd be glad to send it on to them. And my email is joe@cityofwildwood.com.
Okay, thank you for that. So what I was really asking was, has that been provided to members of the commission?
Sir, I thought it was part of the primer, but I'll verify that. And if not, they'll have it tomorrow.
That's okay, no worries. And I could have missed it. So what I just wanted to mention again, and I want to thank everyone for their testimony this evening on this issue. A lot of comments related to science. And so shortly after I became mayor, there were many opinions on the Callahan side in particular relative to contamination or lack thereof. And so one of the things that I thought was important to do, and I completely agree, was to look at what the science was. And so essentially what I did was to ask the EPA and all of those opposed to the EPA, quote unquote, to provide the best evidence. And then we synthesized that and developed that particular white paper. The second thing I want to mention is that the sidewalk that was also referenced this evening, we are doing consistent with that particular white paper. And so there is nothing in violation or anything else of that we're not doing. And again, I would encourage, if you haven't seen it, to take a look at that, because it was a long process to sort of get to the point of getting us away from the he said, she said, or he said, and what does the science actually show. And the last thing I would ask, there were some comments tonight, unless there's any objection from the chair or any members of the commission, there were comments this evening about some land that may have been owned by or is owned by a council member that could be involved in this. I'm not aware of that, but if to the extent that exists, I think it would be important in terms of transparency for us to be aware of it. And so I would ask Joe if you could please provide that information. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time to make those comments.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Vinich.
The white paper that was prepared by the City of Wildwood is part of the packet of information that's included with the primer. It's kind of in there with the rest of the stuff. So if you can't identify it, just give Travis or I a call and we'll send you just a separate copy via email to your address. Thank you.
Without objection, if we could just get that sent, Joe, that would be awesome.
I'd be glad to do it, sir. Thank you.
Commissioner Helfrey.
Mr. Vinich, could you please just tell us what the title is on the white paper? Is it the one that says report to the City of Wildwood on Ellisville site EPA documents, or is it something else? Please.
That's it. Ms. Helfrey, that is it. It's dated July 16th, 2015.
No, that can't be the case because I was elected in 2016. It was done after that.
Well, again, I'll search it and send it.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Is there any other comments, questions, or discussion? Commissioner Helfrey.
So I have a couple questions, and so if you could just bear with me just a second. I know this is a public hearing, and so my question is, where do we as a body go from here? What is the process for time? And the other question I have is that at some point in time, since I've been on the Planning and Zoning Commission, we had a good stack of documents with maps that came through on these properties that related to all of the dioxin contaminations. And I'm just curious if there's a way to look at those again as well. So that's all I have for now.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, to Commissioner Helfri's two questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Where do we go from here? Well, certainly there's a lot of research and documentation that needs to be reviewed, not only by the Department of Planning, but the Department of Public Works and our city attorney. There are contacts that need to be made of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources and the Environmental Protection Agency. And none of those were made until tonight to have the input of the public so that if there is something else we need to investigate, we know now what that may be. So there's a lot of research and, let's say, work that needs to be done before we bring this back. As was noted in the chair's introduction, the earliest this would be back is mid-July. It may take longer than that, I don't know, but that's the kind of milestone right now. And certainly if there's information that's germane to any of the 10 locations, we can put that together. There is a lot of information available. Some is dated, some is more recent, but we'll do our best to give you a comprehensive package.
So, Mr. Vinich, I am not trying to add to your list of stuff. I was trying to take some copious notes while all of these people were talking, because we do take this very seriously. And I want to make sure that we, meaning us and the general public, have the best information available. And so I have a couple questions. Since you are going to be gathering information, if you would just bear with me. At the very beginning, several times that we had reference to several properties were on the list, or several properties were delisted, or this property wasn't on the list. And so I would like to know what properties are what properties were on the list, what properties have been delisted, what properties haven't been. Here's what it was said: which properties are still on the EPA site, which ones have been delisted by the EPA, which site has an environmental covenant with the EPA, and which properties were downstream from the contaminants. And I'm more than happy to put this in an email for you, but I just want this on the record that I'm asking for those things. Also, there are other properties. While we were doing this, I was looking at Google Earth, and there are other property numbers that show up on these two sites that don't really, they don't seem to belong to anything for like address numbers. And so I'm wondering, what about the other properties that are in those areas but aren't listed on our list of properties to consider? Why are they not on the list? Hang on. I would like to know how does, if this takes this long, the property owners that are on this potential list, what happens to their ability to do any improvements or do any work while we are waiting for the outcome of this? Okay, that's all I have. Thank you so much.
Mr. Vinich.
Again, there was multiple questions there, and hopefully I'll remember all of them to answer. I think the second question is probably the most important. Why weren't certain properties included on the list? I believe there's two reasons that I can associate with that decision. The first is more practical. The fact that we had 10 properties for public hearing, there is limitation on how many people we can accommodate in City Hall and how much a planning and zoning commission can absorb in a single setting over a period of time. So it's not to say that there aren't other properties that will be considered, but these were the first 10 selected. The basis for many properties not to be included is that they have had development activity associated with them, meaning Strecker Farms, locations such as that. Those were zoned under St. Louis County ordinances, and St. Louis County did require a phase 1, and in certain instances, I believe phase 2 by environmental assessments to be completed. The assumption is that St. Louis County would have not proceeded forward with the authorization of zonings and the development of residential subdivisions if a risk existed. And so that's why Existing subdivisions, again, like Strecker Farms, Turnberry Place, those were not included. If you look at the properties that are listed here, these are properties for the most part that have remained unchanged for a number of years. They've not been subdivided. They've not been developed with more traditional subdivisions. They retain, in many instances, the original non-urban resident district zoning from 1965. So that's an indicator that there has not been the level of testing or review in certain instances, not all, but that is why, again, they were included and some weren't. In terms of improvements, as part of the introduction the department provided, the intent of the overlay district, like many in the city's zoning ordinance, is to be applied when new development occurs, not necessarily when maintenance is requested, improvements associated with an existing single-family dwelling. So again, a deck, an outbuilding, a patio, things along those lines, those are not anticipated to be triggered by the overlay district. Those are normal accessory uses, structures, and activities that occur. And I believe I forgot the first question, sorry.
Well, I just wanted the list of their properties, but I'll email that to you. And I thank you for going through all that and explaining it.
Yes, and that was it. If you could email me the items you'd like, that way I can make sure I address them all and then get them all to the commission.
Mayor Boland.
So thank you, Commissioner Helfrey, for asking that question. And if I can, I would just like to expand on that. If there's no objection from any member of the commission, I think that one thing that would be very helpful for the public as well as the commission would be to have a grid. And the grid would reflect the properties that are the subject of the hearing this evening. And commissioners, you can feel free to add to this by sending Joe an email, but I'm just thinking a checkbox with each of those properties that would indicate, number one, whether it is part or not of the Callahan site that the EPA recently delisted. Number two, the position of the EPA or MDNR or any other governmental agency that was referenced during the testimony this evening. Number three, whether it is what subdivision, if any, that it is part of. And number four, the specific rationale on the part of the department for including it within the SCODE. And number five, whether it is subject to the scope of the white paper that I mentioned earlier. So there may be other things, but those would be the principal ones. And if we could get that in a one-page snapshot of each of these properties that show all these things, I think that will enable all of us to be much more readily, have our ability much more readily available to sort of make the decision on what the scope of the SCODE should be relative to each one of them. So if there's no objection on the part of anyone on the commission, I would propose that we get that prior to the time that the commission needs to make a decision. Thank you.
Commissioner Ward.
Yes, I'm being a new member on the commission. I was interested in the first speaker that talked about the cost of having things, you know, putting forth your land and saying what improvements you want and how the monies seem to be off center. And I guess I would like more clarification on that, being new.
Commissioner Ward, I'm not exactly sure where all the figures or numbers came from relative to the first speaker, but I can certainly anticipate what the cost would be for a developer, let's say, that was interested in developing a property and had to go through the different stages or steps in the overlay district process.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
Yeah, Joe, when you do that, make note that certain items are done site so that it's not targeted for this as well. Phase 1 surveys are done for every site.
Yes, we require it regardless if it's formally on an NPL or not, but phase one environmental assessments is just part of due diligence on the part of any buyer, in my opinion, as well as the city of Wildwood.
Mayor Boland.
Well, I just wanted to be clear if there were any objection from any member of the commission. I didn't hear any, but I wanted to be sure on the grid and getting that to us, prior to the time that we as a commission need to make that decision. If anyone had a concern about that, to let me know, but that's picking up on Commissioner Humphrey's
I have
comments.
no concerns. I think that's a good idea for the packet when staff.
Mr. Chair, I believe Ms. Helfrey has a question.
Yeah, Commissioner Helfrey. No,
I'm good. Thank you, though.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, there's a lot of information that's been requested by the Planning and Zoning Commission as part of our discussion just here now in the last 5 to 10 minutes. It will be my intent to kind of provide you as much of it in advance of any decision so that we are not getting a ton of information with a limited amount of time to basically review, assess, and question. So I'll be working on getting information to you relative to maps, the grid, the documentation, long before there's a request to act on a department's information report with recommendation. Now, if there's an objection to that and you all want it at one time, certainly that's fine as well.
I don't think there's an objection. I think we are just requesting the information in an orderly, distributed approach so that we can see, as Mayor Boland has suggested, the big picture. Did I get that right, Mayor Boland?
You did, and thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Depler.
First of all, I wanted to reiterate that, yes, I definitely would like to get that information packet, as soon as possible, to try to digest it as much as we can ahead of time. And additionally, I remember, and I've been trying to go back in some of my notes from last year and the year before, and I know in one of these conversations about this site, there was a woman who spoke who also provided kind of a alternative viewpoint from what the EPA was sharing. And I just wondered if we still had access to that information from an alternative, scientific source, just to have all of the sides of the discussion on the scientific basis of, all of these concerns.
Mayor Boland.
I just want to be sure, and I appreciate Commissioner Depler's request there. I just would ask our city attorney, just to make sure we're not running afoul of anything at this point, since this is a public hearing, that it is okay for us to, include that if possible. So I'm not speaking for or against. I just want to make sure that it's good that we do that. Thank you.
There's nothing that would prohibit the commission from considering any and every evidence that has been currently or will be presented to it.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the idea.
Commissioner Helfrey.
Well, what I was going to say, and I'm going to just answer for comments on Ms. Chair Depler, that information that she's requesting is public record because it was presented at a planning and zoning meeting. So it is, we actually have it in the records somewhere. So my question was to ask for, I know that one of the people that spoke earlier stated that, we shouldn't worry about the past, we should only be concerned with the future. But I'm a big proponent of understanding the history so that we have better information to make decisions now. And so when, Mr. Vujicic, when you get all of that information to us, I would request that you all the historical information that you have, all the documents, in my opinion, not to add to trouble, but I think that the more documents we have, the better diagrams, the more papers we can sort through, the better information we have. And I think that all of it is already in the record from previous planning and zoning meetings. So that's.
Mayor Boland?
Well, I am certainly all about transparency and information. That's why we have the cameras at City Hall. I would suggest that you may want to consider limiting that to post 2016, because the white paper synthesized thousands of pages of testimony and data. So anything post that, you may want to go for. If you want to go after that, you're probably going to be downloading a lot of stuff for the next 15 years. So.
No. When on the planning and zoning, I wasn't on the planning and zoning 30 years ago, but since I have been on it, we have addressed this, and there was documentation. I believe it was based on what you're talking about, the white paper, and so that's what I'm interested in, because that also has the woman that Mrs. Doppler is speaking about and her scientific data that she provided.
And I think that was after the 2016 white paper on the calendar.
Yes, it was. Yes, correct.
Okay.
It was. Yes.
Mr. Vunich, you're diligently taking notes here. Do we have any other comments? Okay. I am going to ask for a motion to close the public hearing.
I move that we close the public hearing.
Okay, Commissioner Ward, and second by Councilman Brost. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. Moving on to old business. Mr. Newberry, are you reading PZ 6-21?
Mr. Chair, I'll do that honor if you don't
Okay,
mind.
all right. I was going to give you more time to write.
PZ 6-21, 173 Stones Throw Drive, care of Jeffrey Erb, 173 Stones Throw Drive, Wildwood, Missouri, 63038. A request for a change in zoning from the PS Park and Scenic District to the NU Non-Urban Resident District upon a parcel of ground that is 0.53 acres in size, which is located on the north side of Stones Throw Drive at its current terminus. The property was previously owned by St. Louis County, Missouri, and was part of Greensfelder County Park. But now the subject parcel of ground is under private ownership of the petitioner, such being duly established by an approved boundary adjustment plan between the appropriate parties. Ward 6.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Mr. Newberry, you have a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, at its May 3rd, the Planning and Zoning Commission's May 3rd, 2021 meeting, the department presented its recommendation as part of its information report regarding the item that was just read into the record. The requested change in zoning from the PS Park and Scenic District to the NU Non-Urban Residence District would more appropriately reflect the residential use of the property and planned detached garage. At the May 3rd, 2021 meeting, the Planning and Zoning Commission unanimously supported the requested change in zoning with its location or with its action, again, at the May 3rd, 2021 meeting. The draft letter of recommendation reflects that action of the commission and is now under the authorship of it and is in the appropriate form for final action and to be forwarded to City Council. And with that, Mr. Chair, with a motion and a second, department's available to discuss the draft document. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. We'll open this for discussion or motion on the item. Do I have a motion to accept the department's recommendations?
I'm making a
Councilman
motion.
Brost, second by Commissioner Helfrey. There is no discussion. Commissioner Broyles, did you have your hand up for discussion? Okay.
Someone
Well,
seconded that already?
yes, we're seconded. Okay, so if there is no discussion, we'll move into a roll call vote. Mr. Newberry.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Commissioner Broyles. Ms. Broyles votes yes. Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Chair Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Mayor Boland.
I think we need his vote, don't we?
Yes, Mayor Boland.
He stepped away.
Mr.
Yeah, go
Mr.
ahead,
Chair.
Mr. Vunich.
Mr. Chair, we have 7 ayes and no nays with no abstentions. So therefore, the motion is passed.
Okay, great. Moving on. Mr. Vunich, PZ 2-21.
PZ 2-21, City of Wildwood Planning and Zoning Commission, care of Department of Planning, City Hall, 16860 Main Street, Wildwood, Missouri, 63040. A request of the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider the updated 5 major elements of the Town Center Plan, which includes the boundary map, the street network map, and the regulating plan map, the neighborhood design standards, and the architectural guidelines, all of which have been under review and study over the past 24 months by the City Council appointed Town Center Update Team, with ultimate action on the same being sought on the requirements of state statute, the city's charter, and local code. The Town Center Plan establishes goals, objectives, and policies for the development of the Town Center area to create neighborhoods which are self-sufficient in terms of their mix of land use activities, the availability of green space and amenities for all age groups, and the coordination of its public infrastructure to be functional, safe, and aesthetically appealing to the community in its application with building architecture and other design components, inclusive of streets, sidewalks, trails, stormwater management facilities, and others. These components of the Town Center Plan are intended to complement each other and create interdependence as well. Along with these goals, objectives, and policies, the Town Center area establishes types and densities/intensities of land use for these parcels of ground within the boundaries of the City of Wildwood Town Center area, all of which were the subject of the study by the Town Center Update Team, wards 1, 4, 5, 7, and 8.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry and Mr. Vunich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Department of Planning has prepared for your consideration tonight the draft letter of recommendation relating to the Town Center Update process that was completed by the Town Center Update Team in 2021. The Town Center Update Team, as you know from previous discussions, was a group of resident volunteers that spent approximately 24 months reviewing the current Town Center Plan and making recommendations, deletions, and suggestions for consideration. The Planning and Zoning Commission, in response to the importance of this particular plan, held 2 work sessions on the recommendations from the Town Center Update Team. Ultimately, the Planning and Zoning Commission received a report from the Department of Planning recommending the adoption of the changes as presented to the Planning and Zoning Commission from the Town Center Update Team. One item was recommended for change by the Planning and Zoning Commission that would be different from the Update Team's recommended change. And that related to the property that is located on Crestview Drive just to the west of the city's Village Green property. That property was previously recommended for downtown district. The Town Center Update Team, as well as the Planning and Zoning Commission at its meeting in April, recommended it be Neighborhood General District, a change in the regulating plan, but with a requirement that the first floor of any building or buildings fronting toward or abutting the Village Green have a commercial component. With that change, all of the other recommendations from the Town Center Update Team were supported and part of the recommendation and action of this commission. Tonight, the report is in the appropriate form for final action. And after the chair either opens the floor for discussion or a motion is made, the department's available for any questions or comments, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. I'll open this up for discussion or motion. Mayor Boland.
So Joe, I just have a question. I did unfortunately have to miss the last meeting. I understand there was discussion relative to the drive-throughs. And I've tried to find it in the report, and I'm sure it's right in front of me, but can you please show me where that is in the report and what in confirmation of the commission's action at its last meeting?
Mr. Mayor, relative to that particular item, it is on page 16. Pardon me, 15. And let me find it here. I'm drawing a blank on it right now, so bear with me just, it is on page 16. It's the second item that says list of land use activities by district designations, current and new. And it's the first box under the title, and it says no change. And it explains removal of restaurants with drive-through facilities from the new workplace district. So the intent of the commission at its meeting in May was to not allow drive-through facilities on certain properties regardless of location.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I would make a motion to approve.
I would second it. I second.
Commissioner Broyles, second.
Yes.
So I have a motion on the floor to approve the department's recommendations. If there is no other discussion, we'll move into a roll call vote. Mr. Newberry.
Commissioner Cohn,
No.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Chair Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Mayor Boland.
Yes.
The motion passes 7-1.
Thank you all.
Okay, we're moving on in the agenda to one other item, and I'm assuming Mr. Vunich is going to read that.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, excuse me. Yes, Mr. Chair, I think Mr. Newberry will do the honors.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reapproval of a corrected resolution setting forth the Planning and Zoning Commission's intent to conduct a public hearing on June 7, 2021 for the consideration of the rezoning of certain properties, which may be appropriate for the application of the Special Circumstances Overlay District SCOD upon them, all wards.
Thank you, Mr. Newberry. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, as was referenced as part of tonight's discussion relative to the 10 properties, when the department prepared the resolution relative to the public hearing date and those properties to be subject to the consideration, it included a property that was not part of the city of Wildwood. It abuts the district boundary of Wildwood, but was not inclusive. And so tonight, the department is presenting a corrected resolution that identifies the 10 properties subject to the hearing tonight and eliminates the one mistake the director of planning made. If there are any questions, certainly the department will be available. I would respectfully request a motion and action on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. A voice vote work here, or do you want roll call on this one?
We would need a motion.
Okay, I'll need a motion to correct the Councilman Brost. And I need a second. Commissioner Depler. Let's do a roll call vote, make this clean. Mr. Newberry.
Commissioner Broyles,
Yes.
Commissioner Depler,
Yes.
Commissioner Helfrey,
Yes.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Cohn,
Yes.
Chair Lee,
Yes.
Councilmember Brost,
Yes.
Mayor Bolin.
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
And again, to the members of the commission, I extend my apologies for my mistake. And that apology also extends to anybody impacted by such. So thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of tonight's Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Mayor Bolin.
I just want to thank all of you for all you do for our city and for the time that you take. And I want to thank the department for everything they do. And with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you. We have a motion to adjourn.
I
need a
second that.
Okay, everybody seconds it. All right. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Well,
Good night, everyone. Good
Night.
night, Jeff Boyd.